Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Heights podcast. I'm really excited for today's guest. Today we have on Ryan O'Hara. Is that the last name pronounced right? Or am I
Absolutely.
getting it
As
wrong?
long as it's not
Okay.
O'Hare. It's not I always say
O'Hara.
it's not the airport,
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not the airport.
Yeah. So Ryan, that's funny. Ryan and I, we met at St. Paul's Outreach a couple summers back. Was that 2021? Maybe? I think 2020.
That sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah. Just a couple years
Yeah,
ago.
in 2021, I did a month training with, I was at Washington State University as a campus minister, and the priest, my boss there, Father Paul Herrick, he sent me to St. Paul's Outreach because of the amazing work and training that they do. And that's where I met Ryan, and we had similar connections kind of with the theology of the body. And we just kind of built a relationship through that. And I'm really excited to have him because he has, and I'm excited to hear it myself. I've heard briefly about his story and his testimony, but Ryan has a unique story with infertility, and he has a very, very personal perspective on families in crisis and how to care for them. So we're going to be discussing that today. But before we kind of dive into the topic, Ryan, if you could just share a little bit about who you are and what you're up to now and how you got to where you're at.
Sure. My wife and I, we just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary last week. And so we're kind of at this, what feels like an important milestone. We met and were married in Columbia, Missouri. She was a grad student. I was doing campus ministry at the University of Missouri Newman Center years back. And we'll talk more about this, but pretty early on, we found out that we weren't going to be able to have kids of our own. And so we pursued adoption through foster care and adopted 4 boys through foster care. They're now 17 to 22 years old. They're in kind of that season of life. But I've been in ministry with college students and young adults all these years. Since then, 1997 was when I started that. And then just as of the last 6 months, heard a call to step back from that full-time work with college students. Most recently, I was working with SPO. But to do speaking and teaching and podcasting, consulting and ministry, but also the works of mercy here in the Twin Cities, loving and serving families in need. And so there was just a lot of time that was needed for that. And so I decided to step back from the full-time thing and to focus on the speaking on one part and kind of the works of mercy on the other. And here we are today.
Right. Thank you for the work you're doing. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yeah, thanks. So let's kind of get into today's topic, because I remember just even before this, we were kind of discussing this. And, the theology of the body is a beautiful teaching that JP2 kind of brought to light on God's plan for man and woman and marriage and family. And, I call it the 4 F's. Free, full, faithful, fruitful. I think in the catechism it's free, total, faithful, fruitful, but 4 F's kind of simplifies it. But I just want to maybe have you kind of share and walk through your journey of you're about to, you met the one, you met where it's like, I want to give myself entirely to this woman, walking into I want to be open to life. I want to have kids of my own. And kind of maybe walk us through that journey of entering into marriage, as a Catholic. Right? You were Catholic at that time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So,
we both were.
You have this idea, this ideal of what marriage and family is going to look like. And then kind of maybe walk us through what it was like when you encountered, infertility, and that this might not be what God wants for us, and he's inviting us to something else. So,
well, in a little bit of context previous to us getting married was that both of us experienced kind of a season. Well, we both grew up Catholic. We were cradle Catholics, as we say, and got to college, and then that shifted for both of us. We were at different colleges. I was at a small private Baptist liberal arts college in and around Kansas City, Missouri. She was at University of Missouri in Columbia. That's sort of the main state university in that state. And we didn't meet until after college, but we both had these conversion experiences, as so happened, in these Protestant evangelical environments. Mine was the college that I was in, and through a retreat program and subsequent Bible studies and kind of men's groups, experienced transformation in Christ there. And she was a part of Campus Crusade. And interestingly enough, she was pursuing a call to perhaps serve with Crusade full time as a Campus Crusade missionary, but they were not comfortable with her raising support from the kind of the base of a Catholic church. So she had never really left the church. I had left it insofar as I just stopped going to Mass. But in both of our conversions, it did bring us kind of back into a relationship, thank God, with the Catholic Church. But anyhow, so that was a really important kind of parallel situation for both of us. We had both experienced in deep interior conversion, and a personal relationship with Christ began, and we came back to the sacraments. But for her, Crusade sort of put up a block, and they have, I suppose, the right to do that. I'm thankful, because what it did was it sort of forced her to think, well, what is this Catholic thing all about? Like, and maybe I really need to decide. I'm not going to be on staff, but I think I need to decide this whole Catholic Church thing. So she had a master's degree. She was moving towards a master's degree in education, and so that was a career possibility, and she pursued that. And so then she was at University of Missouri, and then I heard a call to ministry, full-time ministry at that same time, flowing out of my own conversion. And I ended up at the University of Missouri Newman Center as a Catholic campus minister at the Newman Center. And that's where we met and kind of quickly compared notes, her relationship with God and my relationship with God were vital to our lives. And we were kind of the only two, and I use this term very, very loosely, like evangelical Catholics, if you will, and not because of the evangelical Protestantism, but just evangelization, just the desire to share our faith with others. And so we really connected around that initially, and that's kind of what drew us together, and then pursued, marriage in that context.
Awesome. So Ryan, how old were you when you were married, and how old was your wife?
Yeah. So we were 23, 24 years old. Yeah. So yes.
Okay. Great. Awesome. So kind of maybe walk us through just that journey of getting married, and then, being open to life, wanting to raise a family of your own, and encountering infertility. And I honestly, I just want to give you the reins. Just feel free to take it where, anything you'd like to share about that journey.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So again, some context. This is 1998. The theology of the body, of course, was, almost however many years old, 1980, when, as that began. So, but we hadn't discovered the theology of the body at that point before marriage. So a little bit of context, but we just had this desire to go on mission, and the sense that our life was bigger even than just our marriage, that our marriage was for the sake of something bigger. And yet at the same time, we didn't have a lot of great models for that. And we hadn't discovered the theology of the body. And I would say we had a good understanding of the sacrament of marriage, and we had taken some courses on the sacraments together, actually, and that really helped. And we had good examples, but I wouldn't say these sort of thriving examples of holy Catholic marriages around. So we knew we wanted to have kids. In fact, I remember us sort of saying, 6 kids, 8 kids, 9 kids. I remember these were kind of some numbers we would throw around, but we didn't know. And so we got married in the fall of 1998. And like every married couple, right? We say we're coming here freely. We promise to be faithful unto death, and we want to be open to life, that, fruitful, to welcome children lovingly, and to raise them according to the teachings of the Catholic faith. And, I just barely remember saying those words, in the sacrament, but I do remember them. And that was, that ended up being kind of a really pivotal moment. And it makes me think, gosh, it's so wise how the church puts those questions before us. Even though they seem like we were kind of checking boxes, like, of course. But the significance of those questions is so far reaching and so critical. And I didn't understand that at the time, but looking back, I now see the significance. And for us in particular, it was that third piece. And, we were discovering, again, like I said, it was going to be very difficult for us to have children, just the way things were biologically. And so that was this sort of first curveball that we experienced in marriage. And that was about a year and a half in, where that just became really clear. And we were very open to life. We were practicing NFP or not, and so we were just sort of, we were ready. We were welcoming, life, and it wasn't happening. And so that was when I literally, we went back to those questions and said, we promised on our wedding day to be open to life. And that doesn't say just open to, biological children. It's open to life in children in every way, possible, as we saw it and as it spoke to us. And so we immediately began to pray about, how would the Lord, fill our family out in that way? Would it be through private adoption? Would it be through international adoption? And then this possibility of foster care kind of hit our radar. And so that's kind of where we landed with it. But there was our particular experience, I'll just say quickly on kind of the cross of it. Infertility is a terrible cross for any married couple that experiences it, Catholic or otherwise. It's just, there's a great pain. There's this clear and evident association. Marriage anywhere, there's a sense that it isn't just for two people. It's for the love of two people to spill over into a family. I think we're seeing that being not the 100% agreed upon way of married love in our world today, but again, historically throughout centuries, this is the association that we've seen, and that was true for us. And there's this terrible heartache when marriage can't easily and naturally resolve with children that way. And so it was a great and terrible cross. And yet at the same time, there was this door that was kind of immediately opened to not, in some ways, not get us focused just on what was absent, but what was possible. And that was a really important shift. It took time. My wife was ready to go kind of right away. It took me a lot longer to kind of get attuned to, how the Lord, might do that.
Yeah. Can you pinpoint the reason why it may have taken your wife more quickly? Like, let's do this, I'm ready, versus you of taking more time?
Yeah. Well, that's just the difference between she and I. I tend to be pretty cautious. I'm kind of, I don't take risks easily. I like to I have a great fear of the unknown, if I'm just honest. And whereas she has always had this like pioneer adventure spirit, Like, you look in a marriage, like who handles the bugs or who handles the rodents, or, like she's the one. She'll like grab things that are living and throw them out the window or whatever. Like I run to the other room,
Yeah.
it's just, she grew up on a farm. I grew up in the city. I have soft
Hmm.
hands, anyway. So she just,
That's great.
that was very much like her MO, was just adventure and trust and
Hmm.
faith and move forward. And, in fact, one time we were on a mission trip to Mexico. And in this case, we were visiting a variety of orphanages. And it's heart wrenching and beautiful and all of this stuff. And I remember both of us, we were in the throes of infertility and desiring to be parents. And, if my wife had a coat, big enough, she was going to smuggle a bunch of kids back across the border.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally remember her asking, like, could we take any of these kids with us? And we're like, what are you talking about? Absolutely not. But it's just,
That's
that was
funny.
her spirit. And so for me, just
Yeah.
being cautious, averse to risks, and scared, just like, what's it going to mean? What's it going to be like? And
Yeah.
how is that going to work? So there's just all of these questions where she was just ready to jump in head first.
Totally. So, I'm just thinking of couples out there who are infertile. We're
Mm-hmm.
even seeing a rise in infertility.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of like you said, it's a great cross. It's so what I mean, my initial question is just what advice would you give to a couple,
Yeah.
um, even who just found out they're infertile? Like from your experience, what were the temptations? Was it just like anger at God?
Mm-hmm.
Was there a sense of just like what temptations or what wrestling matches may you of
Mm-hmm.
your wife been through, and what did you learn through it to maybe give even them
Mm-hmm.
hope, um,
Yeah.
or practical
Mm-hmm.
if a couple just today found out
Yeah.
that they're infertile.
Well, we experience just a great sadness, a deep sadness, confusion, that we had this sense of like, God, we're doing all of this stuff the right way. We're not contracepting. We are open to life. We want to raise children, to know, love, and serve you. Like, doesn't this seem like a good spot for that? So there's all this, like, there's sadness, there's confusion, there's anger, and it can pit couples against one another, um, and it can cause you to question the validity of married life, married love. Um, it can drive a wedge in the sexual relationship, and it can kind of commoditize that as well. Like, it just, there's all this pressure, and now I say and all of this, like, hope, and you know um, so there's all of these emotions that you're experiencing, and but at the same time, God knows even better than we do what is going on, and he sees that, and he knows that, and God is it says in the scriptures, and it's our experience too, is that God is close to the brokenhearted. And um, I think it can pretty quickly close people off to God, because you get this sense, again, especially with couples who struggle with infertility, you see that it is life, even though we see it happen, you know, uh, unwed teenagers and all of these variety of situations outside of the sacrament, that babies seem to be happening just with great ease and all over the place. And for us, you experience the fact that it takes three. It's this mystery that God brings life. We can't force it, and um, so God becomes even more a part of the equation, because you just see your helplessness in. And so
Mm.
what I would encourage folks is to actually go towards God, rather than away, and towards one another in honesty around what you're experiencing. And if you can't quite get it out in a way that is helpful or healthy with each other, get a third party involved to help you process the pain, the difficulty, the sadness, the confusion, the anger, but also to say, as again, it's cliche, but I've experienced it as true. Sort of as one door closes, other doors are opening. And so God's doing something in us, and it's, for me, it was ultimately going to be about my own salvation, because it was the precursor to the kinds of conversion that I needed, that only infertility and adoption and foster care and adoption was going to bring about. And I could share that story and many stories about that. But it was this dead end that became a doorway. It was an obstacle that became an opportunity. You don't go there day one, but gosh, I hope by year 3, year 5, or I hope that you don't stay in that place, because God is at work and God's the God of life and wants to draw opportunities out of the darkness. The cross was the vehicle for everlasting life, as we know. And so the cross, or the infertility, is a cross, and the cross is death becoming life. And that's the way that we experienced it in our life. And so I would want to speak hope, and I would want to, but also speak empathy. I'm very empathetic for what that experience is like, because it's painful.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, for sharing that. So, I'm reminded of Matthew Kelly's book, Life is Messy. And he just talks about just that, it's not perfect. The order that was once in the beginning in Eden has been, disrupted and shaken. And, we see this in all avenues of life, but maybe there is a family who, wow, it looks like they got everything together. I mean, it might seem that way on the outside, but maybe there is a family where, they were just high school sweethearts, and they got married and got great jobs, and they have a beautiful big family and all the kids seem like they're full of life and all this. And I think there could be temptations in many people where it's like, well, why isn't my family like that? Or, what didn't God call me to such a life? It might, on the outside. And then your journey with infertility, adoption, entering into the foster care world, where you, before your eyes, see just the messiness of life, maybe addiction with parents, abandonment of the kids, and then you raising them as your own, being a father, a real father to them, and walking with. And that is just for people who say might have the quote unquote ideal life or ideal marriage. They don't experience that, and they may not see that. Maybe kind of take us a little bit through your journey, but what would your advice, what would you say to those marriages and those families, if you could share anything with them?
Yeah. I think for us, we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, and I'm grateful we didn't know. We might. I probably would have put the brakes on it. My wife would have gone ahead with it, but I'm glad. My apprehension was appropriate, and because it was very, very difficult. And I always say, most married couples have 9 months to prepare for their first child. We had 9 miles. That was how far we drove to pick up little baby Jose. He was our first foster placement in Phoenix, Arizona. And that was in 2005. By 2008, 13 kids had come through our home, 4 stuck around forever and became our sons. And it was instant family. It was a whirlwind. It was wild. And they were all infants. We had 3 under 2 for many of those months, and And we adopted all four of them by the time we moved to the Twin Cities a couple of years later in 2008 then. And so we went in all the way. And in doing so, we learned a ton. And the goal of foster care is reunification with birth families. And so that's always the goal. But sometimes that's not possible. And so then they look for next of kin and for adoption. If that's not possible, then they go to the foster family. And so that was what resulted for us. But when you're working in a trauma paradigm is different than say a healthy family where trauma isn't a part of the story. And I grew up in a family where trauma wasn't necessarily a part of the story. And so I had certain expectations. I had certain ways in which I imagined, we would be raising children and how discipline might work and how order might work in the home and what our goals were for, education and prayer and spirituality. All of those things you sort of line up and you imagine, because they were a part of your own experience, why couldn't we recreate that for, our kids, even if they came through foster care and adoption? And most of my life in the last 17 years or so since this all unfolded has been kind of unlearning those expectations and having expectations around those same areas that really match where they're coming from. And what I'd say to the other family is I think there's a sort of universal reality that all of us have to look at, is that we have it's a resource question. And there are kids, hundreds and thousands of kids in foster care today in the United States. And I have the firm belief, just because it's a numbers game, that as a church, we could take care of that. I think there are more happy, healthy, holy families just in the Catholic Church than there are kids in foster care who need them. But we haven't sort of, united our vision and forces to take care of it. It's not like ending poverty. Jesus said the poor will always be with you, but he didn't say you'd always have foster kids. There's literally there's a limited number. And I think there's a much bigger number of happy, healthy, holy Catholic families. And for those families, I actually think they have a gift that they could give too. Usually it's oftentimes infertility that brings families into foster care and adoption. That's one avenue. But it's also just big hearts and people who have a strong culture in their family and a strong way of life in their family that others could come into. We didn't have that. And we ended up having to create a culture that ended up being kind of centered around trauma. And that's difficult. And so we needed other families to support us, to give us a break, to build relationships with our kids, to support foster families, to support adoptive families, to understand why they're so crazy and unhelpful and disruptive at mass, and not to give us dirty looks. And, we had to move from parish to parish because we just couldn't find a place where we could be us. And that was hard. I mean, we mostly felt like not come close, but get out. That had been our experience parish after parish. So to those families, I say, oh, you have a role, a really important role too. And actually more so could be a great avenue for kids in crisis, to enter into the love of that family too.
Yeah. I before this, last week when we chatted, I watched, your short video of, are we ready, as a church or just even as a nation, of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, because you kind of highlighted, what will happen, what will increase is, more kids in, foster care, because there's going to be, unwanted pregnancies where, they give birth and, I don't want it. So foster care. And so in the video, you kind of highlighted, you asked the question, are we ready? Are we ready to enter that world? Are we ready to welcome those who have been abandoned? And so do you know I don't know if there is a statistic of families who are not infertile, but either adopt or kind of help out in the
Hmm.
foster care world?
Hmm.
Is it like, do you know the percentage?
Who are not experiencing infertility, or who are?
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe even both. I don't know if there's
yeah,
a
I don't think
stat for
it's. I mean,
both.
I think it is a sizable percentage of couples maybe who struggle with infertility who end up moving towards foster care, but not a
Yeah.
majority. Um, and
Hmm.
and it's all walks, right? You have all sorts of different people. You have single people who are say a 35-year-old woman. In fact, I know a 20-something-year-old woman who became a foster mom, and that's
Oh,
great.
wow.
Like that's it's. Can you care for a child or a couple of kids in crisis? Can your home, even as a single mom, um, or as a married couple, can you care for kids in crisis? So for us, our paradigm was the infertility that brought us into it.
Yeah.
But that's just one piece, and in some ways, it's a hard piece because you so long for children, and then you kind of jump into one of the hardest assignments there is in parenting, and so that's a tough juxtaposition, and sometimes it puts too much pressure on
Hmm.
how the placements go and how those kids sort of integrate into your family life, which is marked by sadness and maybe marked by confusion and hurt. And so that's
Yeah.
I see that as challenging. It was challenging, for us
Hmm.
because you want to build a family that way, but you also have to tread carefully in building a family through foster care. Even though
Yeah.
oftentimes those placements do need adoptive families, and so
Yeah.
both things need to be discerned: a call to foster care, but also a call to adopt through foster care. They don't always
Yeah.
go together, and they don't have to.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. To kind of, one of I think the biggest question that I have for you through all of this is what is, I mean, 17 years you said, is that correct?
Yeah, so
That
what's today?
you've been,
18 years or so since this all began for us in
okay.
2005. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you could kind of leave the listeners with kind of the one thing, if you could share with them one advice that you have learned
Hmm.
through the adoption, foster care, even what you have learned about marriage and family life, what would be that one advice or that one
Hmm.
thing that you've learned?
Yeah.
I know that's a big question.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the illusion of control. I've learned that what I mean by that is I often I the only thing that's in my control as a parent, um, and even in my own life, is not what happens to me or what the results are of what happens to me, but how I respond to what happens. And Jesus had to change. And why I bring that up is that um, so often I would get so frustrated by behaviors, and I would respond. It was like my behaviors were tethered to, or my emotions were tethered to their behaviors, my kids. And Jesus began to separate me and my kids, that they are them and I am me. And he is who he made me to be as his son. And what happens with them and their behaviors is in their world. And for me, I had this tether that existed between the two. And so what the Lord really helped to show me was he loves me independent of what's going on with them, and that he will love them through me. But I don't find my identity in them, either if it's going well or if it's going poorly. And so I started to impute,
Mm.
the good stuff looked good on me. The bad stuff looked bad on me. And I think for us as parents in general, we sometimes conflate how our kids are doing, which means how well we're doing. Those are two very separate things, and that God has
Mm.
given us an identity, a value, and a worth apart from the success or failure of our children. And I can't control what my kids do. I can only control how I respond to what my kids do. And I wanted to change that narrative, and I wanted to be one who responded with love to difficulty and responded to love when there was anger and hatred that would maybe come from them. And so Jesus has refined me through this in a way that I alluded to before that he wasn't going to be able to do, or I'm not sure how he would have done it. He would have found other ways, of course, he's God, but he used the path of infertility, foster care and adoption to transform my heart, but to really learn what's in my control and what's not, and who I am and who gets to define, that answer.
Yeah, that is so good. That is so good. I was just listening to a podcast, or it was Jordan Peterson's wife's testimony with cancer, and Jordan said something to the effect of, she didn't when she prayed into it, she didn't pray that she may be healed and live. He's like, because that might not be her plan, God's plan, but she prayed that she might respond gracefully to whatever might come her way. And so just what you said, I think that's brilliant and just so true. So thank you for that. But so as we kind of wrap this up, Ryan, I just thank you for just taking the time to share a little bit of your story, and giving those viewers, if there's any viewers out there who might be struggling with infertility, just your witness. So thank you. What would be the best way if people want to just learn more about the work that you're doing and kind of follow along? Yeah,
ryanohara.org is my website. People, I've got some articles there, and I also host a podcast called Better Preach. And if folks wanted to connect there, I put episodes together weekly on that. And it's about delivering and developing great Catholic talks. That's kind of the tagline. So if you're interested in kind of ministry and teaching and preaching, the podcast there is an avenue.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ryan. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Brendan. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.